This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. If you thought that 2024 was dominated by talk of artificial intelligence, you haven't seen anything yet. We're only in the foothills of how this new wave of technology is going to transform our day-to-day lives. Companies as wide-ranging and varied as fintech scale-up Klarna and giant international IBM, they're well into the throes of this workforce restructuring and introducing AI to replace, yes, manual processes, but increasingly more complex tasks like customer service and sometimes elements of sales as well. Meanwhile, the majority of HR teams have yet to get our own houses in order. Lattice's recent State of People Strategy report found that only 15% of HR teams have moved from AI evaluation to implementation in 2024, and that was worldwide. It seems that many HR leaders simply don't know where to start when it comes to HR technology, let alone what impact AI is going to have on the wider business as a whole. So that's what we're going to jump into today. And when you're dealing with a mountain of a question, it helps to have a Sherpa. And that's exactly who I brought in. Alan Walker is the co-founder of Udder, an innovative HR technology consulting firm that specializes in guiding HR through treacherous technology transformation journeys, ensuring that they avoid the crevasses on the way to the summit. Alan, sorry about the tortured metaphor there, but welcome to the show.
And I thought I'd come dressed as a lumberjack, but I'm happy to be a Sherpa. I'll take that.
Well, it's a cold enough day for it today. Well, let's start with, I wonder if you could just give us a bit of an overview of where we are in this journey. What have you seen in technology transformation in 2024? And what are you expecting? How are you expecting that challenge, that conversation to change in 2025?
Yeah, I think interestingly to your point around the Lattice report, that I haven't seen much difference in 2024 versus 2023. What I have seen is lots of people exploring AI in HR, considering, thinking about, researching, but in terms of actual action, really taking the lead with the stuff and starting to implement AI into HR processes, however small. The vast majority of HR folk would be described as laggards at the moment because there's such a small percentage of them who are doing anything and doing anything with any real gusto. I do want to counter that a little bit though, because we always have this age-old conversation around AI and we talk about it as if it's a brand new thing. But we've got AI generally, and then now obviously generative AI and large language models. And people have been using AI for years. People have been using AI for assessment technology, for screening CVs, etc., for decades. But people using the modern version of AI, as we all know it at the moment, since that November 2022 piece when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the world, very few are doing anything with it. But I think 2025 is going to change massively. I think people have done their exploration piece. They've considered where can it be best used in their organisation. They've probably done experiments, but they just haven't told the world about those experiments yet, or probably rolled them out into their organisations. And I think people are going to start accelerating now, because those that don't will eventually be either left in the dust or taken over by those that do.
Yeah, it feels like some of that's going to be done to them. Anyway, anyone that's on a cloud SaaS platform is going to be AI'd.
Absolutely.
Whether they want to or not. But it's interesting because it feels like, I'd love to get your take on this. Let's take us back to 2020, early 2022.
Yeah.
Before any of this was even a conversation. It feels to me that within the HR and talent acquisition technology space, even then, those functions had a lot of capability within the tech stack that they used that wasn't being exploited. And it feels like a continuation of that story for me going into 2024. Why would 2025 be any different?
I think you kind of said it to a degree about it being done to them. And I think it will be to a certain degree via technology, but I think it will also be insisted on by leadership. CEOs, CHROs, CFOs are getting it from every single angle about AI being the future, and they're putting pressure on their functions to actually embrace this stuff now. So I think it's not necessarily about having the tools there, because like you say, a lot of the tools have already been there to do things like automation that haven't been fully realised. But actually the pressure from above, the pressure from the business, as we in HR and TA like to call them, that will be there, and that will be hard, and that will be driven into their functions and be expected of them to a certain degree, so there's no dodging it.
And what does it look like? Does it look like a function by function exercise to begin with? I know that you've got, it certainly seems that that's the way that technologies are being built. You have your HR, AI, tech stack. Is HR just going to be responsible for building HR's tech stack and building AI within that?
I think there'll be overlap. I think there'll be functional usage of AI in HR, in finance, in operations, in sales, absolutely. But in the same way that many organisations roll out large ERP type platforms that cross across many of their organisations, they'll be rolling out ERP style AI as well that will look across their whole organisation, whether that's one single piece of AI technology or it's a multi-agent setup where you might have your HR AI, your finance AI, your sales AI all talking to each other through some kind of coordination layer. Who knows? But I think that will be the way eventually, because as with ERP rollouts, when organisations go down that route, whether it's the right or wrong decision, the reason they go down that route is this perceived efficiency they're going to get from it, the perceived productivity they'll get from having a view of all of their data in one place. And I think the same will apply to AI as well.
Just for the benefit of maybe less tech-forward listeners, could you quickly do what's an ERP?
Enterprise resource planning, which is a bit of a collective term often for tooling that can support things like sales functions, it can support finance functions, it can support HR. Workday is an example of an ERP, for example.
And then you've got like Oracle,
SAP, all of those type of things. Some of them are very legacy-based platforms, but the reason big enterprises certainly went down the route of using those is the perceived benefit of having all their data in one place, under one platform.
And I guess all of this conversation, and the majority of our listeners are sort of HR leaders at small, mid-sized companies. I think hundreds or thousands of employees, rather than the sort of organisation that would have a Workday or an Oracle in place. It gets us onto this topic of digital maturity, because I bet there are some listeners in here at the other end of Spotify or Acast. I don't know. I feel like I should mention all of the platforms now. We're thinking, what on earth is Alan talking about? Right? What's a multi AI agentic layer?
Yeah.
It's so far away from that level of complexity. Is so far away from where most HR teams are. I guess the real question is for those listeners: where do you even start on this journey? Because I feel like a good portion of the last couple of years have been HR leaders, business leaders saying, so holy moly, what is all of this? There's so much is my business going to exist in the future? Are we going to have any employees? Oh, well, definitely need to do loads of technology. I don't even know how to present the data at the end of at the end of the quarter. What do we do? And then we're at the end of 2024 and people have some decent picture of what AI is, and certainly, as you were saying, they know that there's a business imperative to get it done, but there's that gap.
Big gap in the middle.
So what's next? Where's the first foot forward?
I think it's really interesting. We love working with organisations of that size, those kind of small to medium businesses, because we can bring real value to them for starters, because of our day job is just literally technology. That's what we do. So we can instantly upskill and get teams up to date with what they need to know. But more importantly, they're able to make things happen really quickly and experiment with things without it being a huge organisational risk necessarily. And because of that, they're able to roll stuff out quicker, they're able to realise the value of things quicker. So although people sometimes think we're a small business, this is too much for us, I'd actually argue that sometimes by embracing technology early, those small businesses can get ahead of those larger ones. So although they may not have all the resources of a large enterprise, they have got the one biggest resources, which they can move really quickly, and they can move at pace. But to answer your question more like where do they start? This is a bit of a how long's a piece of string kind of answer. It depends. It's a very quick one. It depends where they're at in their own maturity as an organisation. If they're fairly immature as a HR function, then maybe there's non-technology stuff they should be putting in place first. So we launched last year something called Index by Udder, which is a way of measuring a HR function's digital maturity. So we're kind of across the piece, 7 different things, but actually 5 of those measures are very technology and process based, but 2 of them are around having the skills in your organisation to become digitally mature. So do you have the skill set as a HR team to embrace technology and implement technology, and measuring that and then understanding what the gaps are to kind of tackle it. So some teams may be really well set up, they may be super smart in terms of understanding tech and understand how to roll it out. What they need to do will be very different to those that aren't ready. So
well, let's talk about those skills, because it feels like something that everyone can be investing in, thinking about right now.
Absolutely.
What kind of skills the businesses need, HR functions need, to be able to cope with that kind of technological change?
Yeah, I think there's a baseline of technical literacy, which I think some HR folk have, some don't. So I think that's kind of minimum. So it's understanding the capabilities of this technology. What can it do? Not necessarily how it does it, because that's going down to another level, but what can it do? And what are the inputs needed to achieve the outputs, so to speak? The other element is data literacy. We've spoken about this before, Felix, that some HR teams are very good. They not only understand the data they're presented with, but they understand how to drive towards good data. I think those 2 things are not always the same. It's all well and good being able to read a report and draw conclusions from it, but knowing how to get to the point of knowing that data, or the data that feeds that report, is good, is another thing. Why that's important is that AI lives and breathes on good data. So the better the input, the better the output. So if your data's in a good place, and I use data very broadly here, it can be quantitative data, it can be qualitative data, it can be reams of PDFs, it can be lines in a spreadsheet, but whatever it might be, if you're feeding that into an AI, it needs to be accurate. So data literacy for me is vitally important, because that is one of the key inputs to getting the very best out of AI. And I think also a process mindset. So again, not all HR people are brilliant at process. They're very good at the most important bits of HR in my mind, which is empathy and caring about your people and wanting to develop them and grow, etc. They're not always great at logical steps of what a process looks like. I think if you can learn that or bring that skill set into your organisation, then again, you're prepared to use things like AI and other advanced technologies to supercharge your function.
I'm just going to ask you a blunt question on this one. Are most HR functions that you come across, or that you have come across, obviously, be very indiscreet to ask about your clients. When you come across HR functions, do you think that they have the right skills and people in place? You know, that sort of classic HR, small HR function. You've got your chief people officer, an HR director, you've got a bunch of HR business partners, and maybe you'll have comp and bens specialist. You know, that sort of structure. Do they need to be thinking about bringing new people in, or do you think that it is actually just a case of upskilling the existing folks?
I think it's got to be a combination of both, really. You don't want to be purely reliable or reliant on either hiring or acqui-hiring or buying those skills all the time. You've got to get your existing people up to a certain baseline, I believe. To answer your actual question about I'll say about our own experience of HR teams, what we find is that if you looked at individuals, let's say you had a team of 10, 2 of them might be technology savvy, 2 of them might be data literate, 2 of them might be good at process, but it's often very rarely the same ones. So those skills are spread out across the organisation or the HR organisation. So I think there's absolutely a need to upskill those that are lacking in those skills to a certain degree, just get them to a baseline. But I think it's also okay to have specialists. If you look at businesses have an IT function because they do IT. A HR function can have data experts, process experts, AI experts. Whether those are standalone experts that only do that, or whether they're people that weave that into part of their day job, I don't think really matters too much, just as long as organisations are thinking about longevity. So if that person leaves, let's leave us. So that's why it's important, I think, to constantly be developing and bringing everybody's baseline up.
It's interesting. I mean, I think that there's a challenge because I can see that working when you're just looking at HR's workflows, right? You're just looking at tech, the work that HR's bringing in. You're handling someone to deal with employee requests, right? Okay, fine. We can bring in a piece of technology to do that. That's very close to the expertise that HR have. It gets more challenging when you start thinking about the bigger piece, which in some companies called people operations, right? So how do people in this business do their job? How can we use technology and better processes to support them? If that's something, and I'm presupposing something here, but assuming that HR is well placed to deal with that, well, they're going to be dealing with the fallout at the end of the day anyway. Have you seen HR functions that have supported that sort of transformation, or do have that kind of piece on their radar, or does that sit within like a transformation function? Or
I've seen it in both. Again, a bit of a politician's answer. We're 5 years old now, and we've worked with something like 400 different organisations over that period of time to go through some type of HR technology transformation. So almost any situation we've lived and experienced in some way, shape or form. Where we've seen transformations work best, whether it's a specifically HR or broader people-based piece, or whether it's something that's cross-cutting HR and other areas of the business, is where HR have got their own really tech-savvy people. And whether they have got them in their team permanently, or whether they brought in those skills, but they're still dedicated to HR rather than borrowed from some other part of the business, that's where we've seen things work best and work in the most efficient way, but more importantly, with the best outcomes.
I mean, if I was setting up a sort of an HR function from scratch, I would probably put in a people ops lead. Someone in there to drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by the way, I hold my hand up and say I'm not an HR an HR leader, but it feels to me like that's the scale of the challenge that's ahead of us in 2025, which is I could see half of the work that HR does to be some fall off of AI transformation or technology transformation, whether that's preparing the business or restructuring, which we're going to come on to in a second, or upskilling, L&D, all of that stuff's going to kind of fall off, and that's why I think it's going to be such a big part of the.
Yeah, the other thing that comes in is that people's definition of HR ops differs from organisation to organisation. In my mind, it's the engine room of HR. So it should include systems and reporting and data and to a certain degree things like training, etc., to make sure the team are bang up to date with all those things. In some HR organisation, HR ops is a glorified new name for HR admin. So they're doing the administrative stuff, but they're not actually driving change or owning processes or owning systems. I think those, if you have a similar view to me of what HR ops is, absolutely, I think every function should have one. And if it's even a relatively small function, if you've got somebody who owns HR operations, again, if you're a team of 3, they don't have to have other duties, but if somebody owns that and they've got that brief to manage systems, process, data, etc., then the outcomes will be so much better than having it as a part-time piece of 10 people's jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to put the sort of Sherpa hat back on you when we're thinking about the sort of advice for 25. I wonder if you could share some more best practice from some of the best, most impressive HR functions that you've come across. So you mentioned having someone or some people who are very tech savvy.
Yeah.
Are there any other sort of ways of working or incentive structures or, really anything that you see actually that does separate this HR function from another one we've worked with?
I think the biggest thing for me, and it's been a word that's been used now for 10 years, and everyone's understanding of it and interpretation and usage of it to a certain degree is different, but agility is the biggest thing. The days of us having a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan or even a 12-month plan, I think change is happening at such a rate now that kind of thinking needs to be thrown out the window to a certain degree, and we need the agility to adjust to the needs of the business, the economy, changes that we can impact, changes that we can't impact, etc. So that ability to be agile and not stuck to doing things in a particular way and only being able to change those things through 12 committee meetings and a 18-month project, I think those things have got to go. And those organisations that have embraced that are doing well. And I think the other is HR teams that think about HR as a product is the word I like to use, and that products in the technology world need to constantly be improving and iterating and made better, even if it's minor tweaks here and there, to always move them along. I think those are the teams that do really well. So rather than, again, having to go through wholesale, massive transformation, but they're constantly thinking about what can we do better this week? What can we do better next week? And most of the time, the business won't notice those little changes, but they will feel them. And releasing those changes to the organisation, go, hey, you can do this now. Or, hey, we can now present data in this way to you. It feels really positive from a manager perspective, from a leader perspective, because you're seeing a HR function that are always striving to do better. Even if it's little micro changes, it's always moving in the right direction. And where we've worked with HR teams like that, we see that they almost never go through a major transformation. Yes, sometimes they'll swap some technology out, but they're not looking at totally ripping up the structure of the HR team. They're not totally ripping up how they engage with their managers or their leadership, because they're always improving those things, so they don't need to.
Yeah, I really like that concept of thinking about HR as a product. And the other element from that is that I think we don't like to talk about this a huge amount, but there's a sort of internal perception, right, of any enablement support function as you're always aware of the fact that you're a cost center. Yeah. Everyone's kind of aware of that. And if there isn't that feeling of momentum, like momentum's such a powerful feeling. Yeah, if you're doing those sort of updates every week, every couple of weeks, as you say, you get noticed. It's so big. And from a tech perspective, if you've got that culture of constantly trying new things and not having the fear of failure, but being aware that 2 out of 3 things you try might fail, but the 1 out of 3 things will really add value to the organisation. That's a really exciting way of working, but I do feel that is quite a long way away from where a lot of HR functions are.
Some of it is, I guess what they need to do is ask themselves whether they want to be a order taker, so they're waiting for people to tell them to do HR stuff, or whether they want to be truly a kind of strategic business partner internally. And if they're an order taker, they are a glorified administrative function. And administrative functions, unfortunately, are always at risk of being automated or having AI done to them. So there's always, and that won't be them controlling the narrative, that will be them being told this is going to happen. Whereas if they're seen as a strategic partner with it's a bit of a cliche, but a seat at the table, so they're controlling the narrative themselves, they're driving the function forward, they're seen as instead of referring to the rest of the organisation as the business, they're part of the business, then they're much more in control of how to use that technology and how to apply it and how to use it.
Which brings us, I think, nicely onto what I believe will be the defining technology term of 2025, which is Agentic AI.
Yeah.
First of all, can you just tell us what it is?
So, I'm going to dumb it down for myself as much as anything.
No, I appreciate that.
Agentic AI, as I understand it, and as I have talked to other people about it, is in essence multiple AIs, each with responsibility for something. So in a HR process, you might have, or actually, let's go down another level to recruitment. You could have agentic AI operating across the recruitment process. So you might have one AI agent that's responsible for workforce planning. And that workforce planning AI could feed information into your, let's kick off and open a new requisition AI. That could then kick off where should we advertise this role based on what we know so far, AI, and so on and so forth, all the way through the recruitment process. You could, in essence, have multiple AI agents looking after different parts of the process. What typically you see when those tools are built is there will be one master coordinating layer that sits above them to basically say, okay, workforce planning AI, you need to now hand over to open a rec AI. Open a rec AI, you need to now hand over to advertise a role AI, and so on and so forth. The real technical architecture, as far as anyone else is concerned, is that might just be one single piece of technology. But often behind the scenes, they're built and engineered like that, because if one starts underperforming, it's much easier to fix it based on just that single part of the process than it is if you just have one AI responsible for everything. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense, and I think it's probably when bring us back to 2022 again. It's probably how most people, including myself, conceived of AI in the first place.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested in, the capability to get to an agentic process. That has existed for over a year.
Yeah,
now.
I agree.
Why is it? Why do you think it's becoming so zeitgeisty?
I think the capability has gone beyond the technical capability, because I think that's been there for probably a couple of years even. I think it's now become a practical capability where, to a certain degree, a relative layman could stitch together something that operated like an agentic AI now, without needing to be a deeply technical expert. There are platforms coming onto the market that are allowing people to do that. There's ways of stitching stuff together using things like Zapier and Workato and other integration tools that would allow you to achieve that. And as importantly, a lot of the big platform players now are starting to roll out this technology as well. So I think what we've come to is almost all of the technical opportunities have kind of funneled together, and they've come together at a point now where it's just a damn sight easier than it was 12 months ago or 18 months ago. And we've gone beyond the conceptual stuff. I did a presentation to Siemens Global TA leadership team on Agentic AI 18 months ago. And they were like, wow, this is amazing. But they weren't ready for it. Nobody was ready for it at that point. And I was probably a little bit ahead of the game on it. But now we are ready, we can achieve it, and we don't necessarily need to go from zero AI in our processes to having the whole thing run by 10 agentic agents. But we can get to the point where we're rolling out 3 or 4 across that piece that are looking after different parts of the process.
And what's it going to look? I mean, what's that process? What's it going to look like, right? So you've got to go through the basic stages, right? You've got to get your mind into a transformation process that you were talking about before. You've got to map out all of your different processes. You've got to get good data collection across the whole thing. When you've identified, let's say, candidate sourcing, to bring it back to your recruitment example before, you've identified that as something that you want to be automated through artificial intelligence. What does it look like? Is it just literally a question of going to market and buying a plugin to do it?
I'm doing this a lot during this conversation.
It depends.
It depends. There are so many tools on the market now, and it would be hard to not find some type of AI-based solution for every step of the recruitment process. So there are absolutely tools out there. You can go and buy something off the shelf, and you can go from having your sourcing process managed by an applicant tracking system or a CRM and manually, for want of a better phrase, to being supercharged by AI, within the space of a couple of weeks. Absolutely. That's the easiest, most straightforward way of approaching this stuff. And I'm not going to list names of solutions because there literally are hundreds to choose from, almost at every single segment of the process. But there are also, and we touched on this earlier, that we are now at the point where if people wanted to build some of this stuff themselves, that there are tools that will enable them to do that. We're the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic, who are the Claude guys. Google are becoming a genuine player as well now. Their AI's killed up massively, and actually over 2024 Christmas period, people are talking about Gemini as being the leader at the moment in terms of its capability. Those tools are obviously the engine room of most of the generative AI stuff, but they're also making it far easier for people to build on top of them. So, and literally the layman can build stuff on top of them now. So there's so many different ways you can approach the how do we do it and how do we utilize it. The easiest way is to go shopping. Find a tool that's out there, make sure it plays nicely with your existing ATS or CRM, listen to folk who are using it, get feedback, etc., and then work with a vendor to implement it, or work with a partner who can support you with that. The more complicated, but potentially, because you're doing something different to what others are doing, better outcome is to look at building your own. But that is a big commitment. You're leading there rather than following others, and it's I guess comes with higher risk, but also comes with greater rewards. And I think the build your own will become a bigger and bigger thing over the years, because AI itself is making it easier for people to build their own technology.
Yeah, it really is. Something occurred to me as you were speaking, right? So we've got this whole ecosystem of different, I call it apps, but software is built on Gemini, on Claude, on OpenAI. It ain't cheap to, and they're all basically a usage, or lots of them are a sort of a usage model, and you sort of, is this putting all of us at, so let's fast forward 3 years where we've all got multiple AI agents across multiple functions in our organization. Are we all going to see our fourth biggest cost being with Google or with Microsoft? Does that look like the future of?
Potentially, I guess it'll come down to from a financial investment perspective is what is it replacing a cost or is it an additional cost? And the big elephant in the room is obviously is AI replacing people, and if it's replacing people, whether that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but let's assume in some circumstances it might well be replacing people. Is it going to do it at a lower cost with a greater efficiency or productivity or outcomes, or whichever word you want to use? But absolutely, I think people will be spending a ton of money with these vendors. I think on the positive side, though, the compute cost and the processing cost of that technology is coming down every week. So if you look at what the API of OpenAI would have cost 12 months ago for you using the leading model versus what it costs now for a far more powerful model that can do a hell of a lot more than the one could do 12 months ago, it's come down substantially. Now, there's always a spike when they release the new fanciest model where it goes up for a brief period, but then they focus on bringing that cost down. So I think in the long run, it'll become commoditized. It'll become heavily commoditized, where it'll just be something that every business has to think about paying for, in the same way they have to think about paying for people and gas, electricity, and all of those things, and the other resources. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. I have no idea if you have an answer for this. Again, it just popped into my head. But given that, I guess, cost saving is such a big element here, do you think sort of, there's obviously you see sort of very high growth economies in some of the lower cost areas, right? You talk about BRICS ages ago, you got loads more emerging markets that are growing sort of double digits every year, in a large part because it's much cheaper to staff. Presumably their business case for adopting AI is going to be much less strong than it is in America or in the UK. Do you think this is going to be another factor which increases sort of, I guess, disparities between developed and developing economies?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like another new offshore location is appearing.
That's exactly what was going on.
Called AI Island.
Yeah.
So I think we're a long way from AI entirely replacing those lower cost areas. I think, if anything, those lower cost areas will be the first to embrace it and to get ahead by themselves using that technology to provide whatever service they're providing. I think in the long run, because those economies are doing very well at the moment, I think we are seeing, to a certain degree, a global balancing anyway, aren't we? Where those developing countries are catching up with the more developed countries, full stop. It'd be interesting to see whether their catching up gets to the point of caught up before AI gets up to its full capability, like the Death Star version of AI, so to speak, fully operational, and we've got actual super intelligence, and AI can do almost every job on the planet. Once we get to that point, it's hard to say whether that's 5 years away or 10 years away or 30 years away. But once we get to that point, has the rest of the world caught up by then anyway? So actually, we are one global economy, globalization isn't the kind of thing people are talking about much nowadays, unfortunately. But if we do become more again like that, then AI will be a supporting factor, I think.
We will see. You heard it here first, folks. Alan, I can't believe it, but that's all we've got time for today.
Wow.
Before we end, could you end in just one sort of guiding thought of wisdom for HR leaders in 2025? Sort of the Alan principle.
Try stuff.
Try stuff. There you go. I think we better finish there. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Welcome.